Laurie MacVittie, F5 Distinguished Engineer, discusses the findings of the company's inaugural Digital Maturity Index, which looks at the ways in which organizations have, or have not as yet, embraced the technologies and processes required to implement a successful digital transformation strategy. The index identifies doers, dabblers and dawdlers, at varying stages of their digital journeys, identifying what distinguishes each group, but also some common challenges which still remain.
Okay, so F5, you have just published, I think, your first digital maturity index. And I think before we sort of drill down into what it revealed, it'd be good to understand the criteria, I suppose, as to how, what were you looking for in terms of defining digital maturity?
That's a good question, because everyone defines that a little differently. We based it on the key characteristics needed for an organization to evolve its enterprise architecture to support a digital business. So those are things like incorporating security into everything. It's not in the traditional enterprise architecture definitions. Security's kind of been bolted on. So, right, incorporating it into everything. Looking at things like observability, automation, adopting SRE practices, elevating app delivery and security to its own domain in order to secure all of these digital services we're building. So all of those kinds of criteria go into it. Are you able to take advantage of multiple environments? Can you operate in the cloud, on premises, at the edge? Where are your apps? Where are your app services? Are you adopting zero trust? Do you adopt, right, a secure development lifecycle, right, SDLC? Right? Do you care about the security of your code? How are your ML practices and your data, right? What do you use it for? Do you use it just to get alerts, or are you looking for insights that help you drive business change? So those are the kind of indicators we look for to see how mature an organization actually is. Now, right, it's not perfect because it is numbers, right? And it's not, it's not always going to be completely accurate, but we felt it was pretty indicative of where organizations actually are in their journey.
Okay, and in terms of the, if you like, high level findings, were there one or two sort of things that really leapt out from the overall surveys that you did? Or I know I say we're going to drill down. I know you've identified three particular groups, but just in terms of the general, were you surprised at how far down the road lots of companies were, or depressed that hardly anyone had really got to go? Yeah, just any sort of, I say, overall observations you'd like to make. Yeah.
So I wasn't surprised that, right, most people fell in the middle, right? They are on that journey, but there's a lot of work to be done. So that was not a surprise. What did surprise me was the use of cloud by even the most mature of the organizations in our study, because there's such a mantra in the market that, right, cloud is strategic, and everyone is going to the cloud and they're using it to deploy, and it's their primary production center. And it turns out that most of them use it for business continuity, right? It's a backup data center for them, which is a very smart, right, idea, because why build a second data center when you have clouds all over the world? But right, we found that was a kind of a consistent, even at the most high level of maturity. And that kind of surprised me. I expected to see they would be using cloud for many different reasons, rather than primarily just for the traditional use cases.
Okay, and in terms of the three groups you identified, I think you quite nicely termed them digital doers, dabblers and dawdlers. So whether some sort of common, I love those, but whether some common characteristics for a company to appear in, whichever of those groups that you put them in.
So, I mean, a common characteristic would be the distributedness of their infrastructure. So being able to operate in more environments, right? If you're just on premises or even just in cloud, right, you're not really as mature as someone who can operate in both, who can fluidly take advantage of multiple environments as their workloads and business evolve or change. So that was something that was common, is the distributedness is still pretty low across even the most mature. They're able to do it, but they don't really do it in practice. Another common factor was the automation of certain functions across IT. So we looked at, are you able to automate things like, updating security policies or changing your network? Most organizations at all levels can do that, right? That's something they've got down. But as you move up the IT stack and you start asking about applications or application security, it drops down. And that's true across all maturity levels. So that automation is pretty common. Everyone is about at the same place, no matter what their overall maturity is.
Okay, and in terms of the percentage in the groups, I mean, what was it with the vast majority in the dabbling group, I'm guessing, but what was the amount in the in the top tier and the bottom? So the leaders and the laggards, if you like, were they hopefully a small number, or were you surprised as to how many were either doing well or yet to really start off?
I was not surprised. Only 4% are doers, right? They exhibit very high levels of maturity. I was not surprised by that because we've only really begun this journey, right? We're only in the second phase really of modernization. And if you think about some of the organizations, you might immediately say, oh, they're very digitally mature. Just from a consumer perspective, you might say, oh, my bank is pretty mature. Look at all the options I have and what I can do online. But that's actually not the case. There are almost no financial services institutions in the doers category. They are very good at how they interface, but most of their business is still very traditional. It's locked up in different environments. So they have to modernize that. And modernization is a lengthy process, right? You can't just shut down the entire data center and say, all right, we're going to modernize now for the next year. You can't shut down your business. So you have to do it very carefully, and that takes time. So seeing only 4% in that top category was not surprising at all. Seeing, it was 31% were in the dawdlers. So they were just kind of hanging out. They're doing things, they're moving, but they are really taking their time. That wasn't all that surprising either, because the magnitude of this task is huge. And some of them are in industries that are highly regulated, and under intense scrutiny, and where the impact of making a mistake is measured in human lives instead of dollars. For those organizations, like healthcare, they are moving at a more measured pace. And I'm glad, I don't want them going, hey, we just modernized this, let's test it on you. No, thanks, no. So, it's okay, This is not really a measure of, companies to say, oh, you're doing it wrong. It's more, illustrative of just how vast and difficult this task actually is. We talk about digital transformation like it's sticking up a facade, like in the Old West, we just stick up the top of a building and it's actually hiding this old rundown place, but you'd never know it. That's not it. It's really about fixing that building behind and getting it up to snuff. So even if the front looks great, doesn't mean the back end does. And that's really what this journey is about, is getting the back end ready to support a digital business. So when the next big thing comes along, and it will, organizations can go, let's do that. They don't have to struggle to incorporate new technologies. That's really the goal of all of this modernization.
Yeah, and in terms of the industry variations, you obviously said there, for example, the finance people, we might assume that they know they're leaders, but behind certain customer-facing apps, if you like, there's not necessarily digital leadership. So were there any? Were there any particular industries that were way ahead in their journeys, and others that whether, as you say, for regulatory reasons or whatever, were somewhere behind? Just any sort of insight you can give us on industry breakdown.
I love the result because it's manufacturing. Manufacturing is doing faster than most industries. And I suppose if we thought about it, we'd say, well, manufacturing has always been on the forefront of innovation and change, and automation and embracing technology in order to be more efficient. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but still, it kind of was to go, wow, Manufacturers are like going crazy with digital transformation, but they rely on it heavily, a lot more than perhaps we do, right? In most businesses, we may still do a lot of things manually that they were like, why would you do that? Just, there's a program to do that. Go do it. I see some slowdowns as they run into trying to get the vendors of certain pieces of software that the manufacturing industries often rely on together, right? There's vertical software. Those have to be updated. So sometimes they run into blocks like that. But generally, they're ahead of most other industries. And I think it's just the nature of their business and that they're so focused on efficiency, they're willing to just, move forward.
And would it possibly be as well that although obviously manufacturing operations are complex, but the overall, if you like, digital profile is relatively simple compared to organizations that are much more customer facing potentially, etc. So do they have a simpler journey to digital transformation, I suppose is what I'm asking.
They have a less visible one, that's for sure. And that's right. And it's not to say that manufacturing is without its risks, right, to people. So they still have to worry about that, right? I live in the Midwest where paper mills are prevalent and they use automation extensively. A lot of the jobs are just monitoring the machines, but there's still risk. If the machine stops and you have to get in there, right, it could not recognize you and, well, it could do real damage. So, right, there's still risks to what they're doing, but I think they're able to move ahead faster because it's not in the public eye, right? We don't notice if the assembly line goes down at the paper mill. Nobody tells us. That's not really headlines because it doesn't impact us, right? Until maybe 6 months down the road and we go, hey, what happened to all of our paper towels? Why can't we get napkins right now? Oh, that happened. But we don't get mad, right? It's not the same thing as I can't get at my bank. Okay, that's frustrating because I need that day to day. So I think that the ability to kind of do this transformation, make mistakes in the background where nobody's going to notice is an advantage for them. If you remember the Southwest Airlines meltdown, right? They're doing modernization and they have to do it in the public eye. So when something goes wrong, everybody notices, right? It makes headlines, people are angry. And I think that adds some pressure to their journey. So they maybe have to be even more careful, right? Whereas manufacturing is like, well, we'll try it on this one assembly line, see what happens, right? Oh, that worked, great, do it again. Nobody notices if they make a mistake and they can just move ahead. Other industries have to be more careful, perhaps.
And in terms, I think earlier on in the conversation, you gave outlined a lot of the technologies that are characteristic of digital transformation. And in terms of the three groups, are virtually all of the technologies being at least looked at by all of those groups? Or I'm thinking things like, some of the newer things like AI and the data analytics, etc. Are some of these technologies not even on people's radar yet? Or is it more a question of they all know about these things, but they're at different stages in the journey of working out, how they can best use them in their organization?
That is exactly the case. We found no one who was ignoring or missing a technology or a capability. They all know what they need to do. They're just at different stages of implementation, right, of executing on it. Maybe, right, looking at how does this fit in our strategy? What's the best way to approach this problem? So they're just taking a different approach to how they implement it, but they are all, right, aware and using some amount of all of the different technologies and capabilities.
And in terms of the challenges, presumably the folks at the bottom, the dawdlers have more to overcome, but were there some, for example, at the start, again, early on, you identified common sort of things people were all doing, but are there some common challenges that in essence, people aren't doing things because they're all facing the same, however mature they are, shall I say, are there still some obvious places that are causing everybody problems?
Yeah, and for that, we go back to the source data. So, right, this is pulled from our annual research. And in that, we ask about the challenges that folks are facing. And one of them that's particularly always high, 95% of organizations are struggling with right? The distributedness, multi-cloud. How do we operate in multiple clouds and multiple environments? And what are the challenges? Security, it's right, complexity. There's too many APIs and tools, and we're siloed, and right, it causes a big mess. That challenge really hurts in the core layers of trying to be a distributed organization, because if your infrastructure can't be distributed, you can't operate it in multiple environments, you can't operate anything that relies on that. So if you can't put a server in the cloud, you can't operate an application in the cloud or an API in the cloud. So, right, we see that as kind of a blocker where people are challenged by, how do I do this? I don't have the skills. There's too many different options. It's complex. How do I automate that? And they get stuck trying to figure out how we're going to manage distributedness, which is almost a requirement for some of the other capabilities.
And in terms of the, I'm not sure whether your digital maturity index sort of measured exactly, but in terms of the overall success rate, if such a thing exists, of digital transformation, did you find anything, or is the good news, if you like, that as I think I've gleaned from the conversation, that nobody's got this thing done yet, and therefore if you are somewhere, shall we say, lower down the where you need to be, you shouldn't be too, because I say that one gets the impression, digital transformation talked about every hour of every day, and you get the impression that everyone's doing it, and therefore if you're not, you're gonna business close in 6 months. But the reality would appear to be perhaps that however, whatever people are saying and the impression, there's still quite a lot of time for everybody to get there where they need to. It's not too late, is that? Sorry, that's a long question, but
yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So, right, you can, run it at a pace that makes sense, that you're not going to overwhelm or exhaust yourself and then put yourself out of business, right? It's not generally failing to achieve a digital business that puts you out of the market. It's usually the fact that you just exhaust yourself, your resources, you lose talent, or you can't invest anymore, so you get stopped, right? It's not taking a strategic approach to this journey that tends to be the problem, not my competitor got there first. That said, organizations that are dabbling or doing higher levels of maturity do cite more benefits from their digital transformation. They're able to capitalize on new business opportunities. They do feel like they have a competitive advantage. So they are netting benefits from all of this transformation work that the dawdlers are not yet capitalizing on.
And did your research reveal the importance that people place on digital transformation, whether that's in comparison to things like workforce skills, sustainability, etc., or just simply in terms of measuring that? If you ask them how important is digital transformation out of 10, hopefully everyone said 9 or 10. Or there's some people that actually surprised you and said, well, actually we're not that bothered by it, we don't think it's that important. Or what did you find out?
We did not ask. There are some questions we don't ask anymore. One of them being, is security important? Well, of course it is. Who's going to say no to that? Yeah. Right. So asking even about the importance of digital transformation, I think we would get a pretty high rate of, well, yes, of course it's important. Right. So we haven't asked that, but asking perhaps how important it is to achieving certain goals of the business might be an interesting question to ask in the future. So we just happen to be going into that cycle of doing our next year's report. So I may add something like that in just for you.
And in terms of, if it's possible to summarize what you discovered in terms of what the doers are doing particularly well, and therefore maybe offering some advice to folks into what needs to be prioritized or what they need to focus on, because as you say, it's a marathon, so you don't do everything all at once. So what are are there some common first steps that people are taking on that road to successful digital transformation?
I think that what the doers have done correctly is almost an order. Right? Like we were talking about, if you don't have the infrastructure, you can't get the apps distributed. So, they've done it in the right order. They've recognized that observability right? The ability to understand the state of a system across environments is very important. So they put into place all of the little mechanisms and technologies they need in order to gather the data that they need to understand how everything's performing and what's going on and where it is. That data forms the basis for insights that tell you things about the business, not just how things are operating. If there's sudden spikes in demand in a certain region of the world, observability, those insights will tell you that. And then you can look at it and say, well, is this because there's, an attack, or is it because people really want our product? And when you find out it's your product, you can do something about it. Without the ability to see all of that observability, you'll never get to that end state because it takes too long to dig through logs and see something happening. By the time you notice, it's already over. You can't capitalize on it. So I think they've done a really good job of recognizing that data is kind of central to everything going on, and not just the business data. Of course, that's important. We've known that for 50 years. But the operational data, the information about performance and security and what's going on where, is critical to matching to business outcomes. And they've recognized that, and they've actually built a data or an observability strategy around that so that they can fuel automation, so that they can make business decisions off the insights, and they can just generally understand, right, what's going on in their digital business. So I think that observability, the data piece, is actually like the most key, and they've latched onto that. And when we look at the data, the doers have strategies. They know what they're doing around it, and the rest of them, really don't. They're kind of just dabbling in observability. They haven't really committed and moved forward.
And is there I don't know whether the research revealed or just sort of your own knowledge and experience of this, on the people side, again, those companies that are leading, have they sat down and, if you like, shared their vision with the whole company, so everyone's hopefully bought into it, as opposed to maybe, again, lower down, people see or hear about things and they not really understand what it's about, and they're potentially worried that, hey, they're going to put some AI in here and I might lose my job. So is it critical, if you like, that people are at least explained? They might not buy in for whatever reason, but at least you share the vision and what's going to happen, as opposed to just letting people discover bits and pieces as you go along.
And yeah, we don't study that, but and I don't ask, but I assume you're right. I mean, if you don't feel connected, right, if you're doing your job, you don't feel connected to what the organization is doing, it's really hard to be motivated and want to do the work. Why am I doing this? Right? Everybody wants to have meaning to anything that they do. So understanding the strategy and the vision is very important. From personal experience, right, as we've been embracing AI, right, our leadership has been very good about making sure that they communicate with us, to show us options, to tell us how we're moving forward, how it impacts, right, everyone, and right, reassuring us, hey, we're going to take advantage of this and we're going to use it, right? And it's, it's up to all of us to do that. Everyone should get involved, right, and encouraging that. So that's a very good way of motivating someone to say, how can I use AI, right? That's the first question, right? I'm not an engineer. Well, I'm an engineer, but maybe you're not, right? So, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know how to tune models or build these things. What can I do? And start thinking about, right, oh, well, maybe some of this AI applies to how I research or what I research, or I incorporate it into, helping me, identify things. How can I use it, right? That's really kind of the question. So I think that, right, a good leadership when it comes to AI or even digital transformation is going to make sure they clearly communicate and help everyone understand how they're connected to that strategy, whether they're an engineer or in support or right doing marketing. Everyone should be connected to that, and a good leadership will do that.
Okay, maybe just finally, I don't know, is it going to be an annual thing you publish, or potentially? Yeah, and this is the unfair question, so I'm going to ask a bit of crystal ball game. So if you do repeat the exercise in 12 months time, what might you expect to have change? I mean, for example, I think you said only 4% in the doers. Would you hope that that got to double figures by this time next year? Just anything you might, with your knowledge, think hopefully in a year's time, this is how much better the picture might look.
I think we'll see a lot of progress from the dabblers, well, the dawdlers to the dabblers. I think not as much at the top, and that's primarily because I think everybody's focus was like, holy cow, look at this AI thing, right? And so everyone kind of went like over there and went, yeah, that's cool. Look at this AI thing. And right, there's so much, not hype, but urgency around it that I think everyone's so focused on that, they're not saying, but how does that fit into, right, digital transformation? And, what's going to happen? And if they don't actually mature that, right, data is the fuel for AI, including the LLMs. So if you don't have data, you're not going to be able to capitalize on it. You'll be relying on somebody else's model, right? I'm not sure that's always what we want. So, right, I think we're not going to see a lot of movement toward doers in the next year, and primarily because we've all been, hyper focused on how do we use AI right now.
Okay, I mean, it's been brilliant to chat, and thank you for sharing the insights you have about the report. And as I hope, hopefully we might speak before then, but if not, in another 12 months time, we can get together and see what has actually happened. But for now, thank you for your time, Laurie. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And yes, I look forward to a conversation in a year about it.
Thanks again.